Welcome to FESPA's Sustainability Spotlight podcast and video series. I'm Graham Richardson-Locke, and I'm going to be hosting this series of webinars where sustainability best practice is our priority and driving change to reduce negative social and environmental impacts is our primary concern. We're providing online information to give actionable advice to make more sustainable choices for your business. My guest in today's podcast is Laurel Brunner, who has a wealth of experience across the printing industry. Before we begin, Laurel, perhaps you can tell us a bit about yourself and your experience.
Right. I'm basically a journalist and a consultant. I've been working in the graphics industry for about nearly 40 years, and most of my knowledge and experience is with digital systems, so digital pre-press, digital printing, digital production models, workflow control, color management, process automation. And a few years ago, I got very keen on, well, I've always been keen on the environment, but I was very keen to set up some sort of model whereby we could raise the visibility of sustainability and the environment within the graphic arts industry, so for printers and publishers. So with the help of a number of industry sponsors, including FESPA, thank you very much, we've been able to fund lots of content that gets shared for free with a network of publishing partners around the world. So it's translated into lots of different languages, and hopefully it's a resource to give people a bit more information about sustainability and the environment, carbon footprinting, overall environmental impact. And I look at in these blogs at all sorts of things, from what the UN is doing to individual new products that are carbon calculators or carbon friendly products. So, and it's, yeah, that's what I do. And over the last few years, I guess I should also say that I've been heavily involved with standards development within the International Standards Organization. This is a long time ago now. I was co-opted by the British Standards Institute to join the UK committee for ISO, basically because at the time there were relatively few people who had much knowledge about digital production. They were mostly people that were printers and finishers. So as part of that, I ended up convening a working group that looks at the environmental impact of print. And we've published a number of standards. The first was ISO 16759, which is essentially a carbon calculator so that you can calculate the carbon footprint of a print run. But there have been others as well since then.
Okay, fantastic. So I think it's fair to say that you've been around long enough, seen enough to be invested in this topic today. So today I want to kind of talk to you about the primary opportunities for energy management and reduction in print factories. I think, you know, the question around how we can do this, if you rent a factory rather than own it, what we can take control of, and the energy consumption audit process that you might use, whether it's Energy Star or any other suitable frameworks across the sector. So let me ask you the first question today, which is, what is energy management in a printing company? What would be your definition?
Well, I suppose energy management, like any other resource in a printing company, has to be managed. It's not really any different than it would be in any other firm. So whether you're building tractors or publishing books, you need to be sure that you can manage your energy, because it's a huge cost, obviously. Most companies that are committed to doing that follow the idea of reduction and recycling and all that sort of thing as much as they can. But essentially, energy management is about the energy use, how efficient the energy is that you use, and how much of it you use. So it's a fairly simple thing. It's important to keep in mind that unless you can measure something, you cannot control it. So the most important aspect of energy management is actually being aware of how much energy you use, where you use it, and how much you're paying for it.
And I think, yeah, to your point of where you're using it, whether it's heating, lighting, running a press, there are methods for tracking, aren't there, at a kind of a more granular level than just your overall bill?
Yeah, absolutely. And printing is essentially a manufacturing process, and it happens to use machines that take up quite a lot of energy. So it's very important to know what it is that you're spending your money on and why. So for this reason, it's important to always review the machines that you're using. There's no point saying, oh, we've got a 20-year-old press, so we've been using the same technology for years and years. So we have not been having a negative impact on the environment because we haven't been replacing our machines. That's really unrealistic, because 20 years ago, presses were not nearly as energy efficient as they are now.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And in terms of the frequency of looking at your energy management policies, what's your sort of recommendations on review period and yeah, how often you should be looking?
This is a very subjective thing, because it'll always depend on the size of the company, the turnover it's got, how many people are involved, how automated it is, and where you're starting from. If you have an energy management system in place, you'll be able to capture, excuse me, the energy policy. You'll be able to define one within the idea of a management system. You'll be able to define the targets and all the rest of it, so that you can work within a well-specified framework. And that framework will define the frequency as part of the policy, if you see what I mean. So obviously you should also include in that, it shouldn't be fixed. You should also include in that a review as soon as something changes in the company, such as, I don't know, maybe you take on a new account and you need to buy more kit for it, or maybe you're replacing a big web offset press with something else, maybe a fleet of digital machines. Whatever you happen to be doing, that major change and the processes associated with it should be reviewed in terms of its impact on your energy footprint. So again, it's still subjective, but you should do it in a way that's sensible. So, you know, obviously doing it once a year is going to be quite a hassle, but doing it once a decade or every week is equally
insufficient.
And it's not going to work, because you're not going to capture accurate data. So I would generally recommend an annual basis, even if it only takes you half an hour, you know, even if you're just confirming all of the kit that you've got and what your expected energy footprint is for that stuff, and obviously for the premises and all that sort of thing. Once a year is probably a good starting point.
And if you haven't done it before, would you? What's your thoughts on Energy Star audits and you know, the kind of advice that you can get from those organizations?
I mean, I would go with an energy management system rather than a certification system.
Yeah.
You want to have something that fits in with the rest of the management of the company. So if you're 9001 certified or 14001 certified, an energy management system can fit quite nicely into that, in terms of the documentation rules and the frequency of reviews and all of those sorts of things. And ISO have a standard. It's ISO 50001, which is basically a framework for an energy management system, and that works out really quite nice. It's quite a nice thing to use, because it follows the principles of 9001 and 14001. So you're not having to come up with a completely new approach to the way you manage your energy. And Energy Star is it's more of a US standard, and it's one that I think it's more appropriate for appliances and machinery than an entire company.
Okay. And how do you think we should go about measuring the sort of energy performance in the printing industry? What are the key points that you'd make around that?
I would recommend that you define some sort of a representative scenario, and then you've got a reference data set. So how much energy did we use 3 years ago, and how much did we pay for it? And what did that look like over a period of months? Is there any seasonal influence in that usage? So you start looking actually at the data that you've got, and that helps you to track your energy usage over time in a consistent way, because you're using the same parameters from quarter to quarter or from month to month. And the main thing about any management system is that it should yield data that is useful. And that means that it's meaningful. And how you decide what's meaningful or not depends on your business. Generally, people go with a combination of kilowatt hours, costs, and any contextual data, by which I mean where the manufacturing equipment is located. If that's off-site, is it in a place where the energy usage is different than the one for the main premises or whatever. So anything contextual is important to capture. That's possibly hardest because sometimes it's hard to see what the context is for a particular spike in energy usage. But so you need to combine lots of different data capture models. So if it's been cold for a long time, or if it's been a heat wave, for instance, or if you've had a really lean couple of months with not much production going on, obviously your energy usage will go down, but that's not necessarily representative on its own. So you can tie in the production volumes to the data. I think it's a very good idea to map equipment upgrades and the performance of new kit to your energy usage, so that especially if you've bought something on the basis of its energy performance, you want to make sure that you are indeed getting a more efficient machine.
So in terms of the logging of that, putting a data logger onto your key piece of kit is a good idea, isn't it? Or isolating where the kit is in your system. Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, for example, if you have your production equipment located in a part of the building that is generally colder than the rest of the building, you're not going to have to manage the ambient air temperature. So for example, if it's near a delivery sort of dock, you've got doors being open and closed all the time. You've got cold air coming in. You might not need to air condition that part of the building. Silly little things like that. I mean, I say silly, but they do make a difference. I know of one company, this is a bit silly sounding, but we arranged, everyone had a fleece, company branded fleece that they were encouraged to wear in the office so that the heating could be turned down in the winter. And it made a huge difference and people liked it. They had their own little fleece. So.
And I think things like loading bay, loading bay shields so that you're not leaking, insulation, all those kind of activities, actually, they might make a fairly small percentage difference on their own, but when you start adding them up collectively, you're just saving money. And as I suppose, as they say, the best kilowatt hour is the one you don't use.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a really bad idea to have your office staff, your administration, sat near the loading bay. I've been to lots of companies where it's above where the loading bay is, and you've got lots of cold air coming in all the time, and it does make a difference. Yeah.
So where would you recommend? So you've said about scope, and the first thing to do is audit the type of kit you have, your operating hours, but anything else that you would add in terms of where to get started with energy management?
I think the most important thing, as with anything, is that your company commits to doing it. You have to make that decision to say, right, we are going to implement some sort of energy management in the business, and we're going to do it by auditing our existing performance. Again, look at the costs and usage on recent bills, compare them to the same time last year, what's changed, why has it gone up, and be prepared to actually be honest about why it might have gone up. It might not be your fault. It could be externalities like the Ukraine war and the price of energy and all the rest of it. These are important factors to consider because they help you. The more context you can give to the data, the better you can understand it for how you should plan for the future. So that's the starting point, is that commitment. The next thing that's really important is to make sure that everything is documented consistently. So don't have a bunch of different people with a bunch of different Excel spreadsheets that are all configured differently, because then you can't compare like with like. So you want to do it, if you did decide to do it at a departmental level, come up with a template that each department can use and that each department can take responsibility and ownership for, so that the data capture is consistent and also obviously accessible. I mean, some organizations have a kind of quarterly update to everyone involved in the company to say, look, this is what we're doing with our energy consumption. This is our target for next year or whatever. And that actually is a very important part of the energy management system. You must be sure that you have goals. You have to define some sort of a goal. You might want to say 5% reduction over the next 2 years. And that will, once you get a goal, you have to start looking for ways to achieve it.
Yeah, I really like these the idea of having treasure hunts within the business where employee teams look for leakage and areas for improvement, because often they'll spot things that you just don't necessarily see if you're
absolutely. Silly things like desktop printers that get left on overnight, that uses energy for nothing. You're much better off turning them off. Leaving lights on overnight when the business is closed. You don't need to have the place in complete darkness, but you do need to think more responsibly about what energy you're wasting. Every time I get the train up to London and go past London Bridge Station and see the city, it's just horrendous how much energy we're burning.
Yeah.
Nothing, Those tall buildings have all got red lights on top of them to warn helicopters and light aircraft that there's a tall building here. They don't need all the lights on. Yeah, but that's a whole other thing. I won't rant about that.
Well, no, but it's a fair point, and part of the sort of process of considering what we need to use rather than what we're used to using. And just because a skyline looks great is no reason to use it, is it? So unless you are working 24 hours, having the kind of sensor technologies to just switch lighting on as and when you walk into a room and as and when you need it. In fact, I was in a Princeton in Denmark latter part of last year, and one of the things they did was just introduce lower wattage lighting into all departments. And again, it might have made a difference of 2% to the overall energy bill, but made perfect sense and yields a benefit.
Yeah, exactly. And that all of those little 2%, 1%, they add up to something that's a substantial aggregate. I would also recommend getting a copy of the ISO standard 50,001. It follows the same principles as 9,001 and 14,001, as I mentioned earlier. Didn't explain what those principles are, and they are plan, do, check, act. So it's a kind of constant cycle of improvement where you plan, you do, you check to see what's happened with whatever it is you've done, and then based on what those checks throw up, you act to make a change. Plan, do, check, act. You just keep doing it time after time. But I do think the most important thing is to get commitment and to recognize that this will take resources and that you'll have to be prepared to provide the resources in terms of time and cost and all that sort of thing.
And it's kind of essential that it's top down, isn't it? That it's not middle management.
It's everyone.
It has to be the entire organization.
This is everyone's problem. And the sooner we accept that, the better things will be, and more likely that we'll make changes. This is about changing behavior. It's about saying, well, it's convenient, but it's bad for the planet, so I won't do it. I'll make a change in my personal behavior to get us along the way. Companies do all sorts of things. They can recognize staff that have made a big contribution to any particular thing. They can involve the customers as well in whatever planning it is. It doesn't have to be all doom and gloom and misery, but any effort that we make makes a difference.
And I suppose just as we as consumers are altering our behaviour, looking to reduce, looking at how we either stop using plastic or, you know, think about turning the heating down by 2 degrees. It's just all part of the same process, isn't it? So I think most people are readily able and willing to get involved and to make these changes work, because every saving that you make is just going straight to the bottom line and giving you increasing
You
your
hope so. You absolutely hope so.
yeah.
But there are so many things that individuals can do, but we don't think about it. We just like throwing food away. That's why do we do that? We do that because we don't plan properly. We don't think about how much food we're making, and then it sits in the fridge and you think, oh, I don't want leftovers, so you bin them because it's convenient. And it's a very hard thing to change that pattern of behavior, but that's just one example.
Yeah. So in terms of the sort of things that can go wrong for printers, have you had any kind of experiences or observations about where things are easy to get tripped up around? Or, I mean, you've spoken about the value of standardization, of bringing in having a policy and a framework within which to operate around. I'm sure that mitigates a great deal of risk, but yeah, what are your kind of things to watch out for as a printing company?
So what could possibly go wrong? Graham, are you a glass half full or a glass half empty person?
I'm an optimist, if that's what you're asking. So
I've got two responses to that. An engineer will tell you that the glass is the wrong size.
okay,
That's the important part about this, is when you plan, you make sure you take into account all of the variables and you don't come up with an energy management system that's overly ambitious. If you ask me the answer to that question, I would just say that the glass needs topping up, but that's another matter. The engineer example is the closest.
yeah.
And as I say, what can go wrong is having a really poorly thought through plan, one that doesn't take into account all of the variables. So you need to make sure that you can isolate costs, which are going to be subjective because they're in your control to some extent, but they're also an externality that you don't have control over, with usage, which is an objective cost, or an objective process. So if you don't get buy-in from and commitment from the management, you're also likely to have problems with implementation. Because as well, if you can get everyone involved, you'll come up with other ideas for what you can do to incorporate in your plan. And that's really important because, as you said earlier, people working in a business who are not necessarily the owners of the business or the managers, but they're seeing firsthand where energy is wasted. That I mentioned earlier about the desktop printing example, but there's loads of things like that, like in kitchens, to have the coffee machine unplugged overnight probably saves some energy. I don't know, it depends on your coffee machine, I suppose. Don't underestimate how much work is needed to do this, and don't underestimate the time. It might not be a lot of time, but you need to be committed to making sure that you allocate time in your schedule to doing this stuff, and to working with everybody involved, so that your energy management program is as well informed as it possibly can be. And if you don't manage to come up with a really good action plan, you will fail. And that is the most common reason for things going wrong. It's that, what's that expression? Failure to plan is planning to fail.
Planning to fail.
Yeah. So you need to know.
We can all recognise that you know, good intention doesn't get the job done. Actually, planning things into your workload and seriously.
You need to know what it is you want to achieve. I mentioned earlier about targets. Before you try and work out how to achieve it, it's think of it as a map. You need to define the map from where you are now to where you want to be, and it needs to go through that route. Needs to take into account all of the factors that involve energy usage in your business. So
And I suppose once you've done only once you've done the audit, only once you've benchmarked your production facility, can you then determine what the likely benefit is of investing, whether it's swapping all the lighting out for LED, whether it's implementing solar PV, whether it's putting in voltage optimization. All of these kind of options only arise once an audit and you can genuinely have transparency in what your energy demand is, because otherwise it might take you 30 years to pay off the investment in solar PV, for example. It doesn't necessarily fit every time, does it?
No, I think the before the audit, though, the most important thing is understanding what you want to achieve, and that can mean, well, a target is obviously a percentage reduction over 2 years is the easiest one, but you might want to have a really ambitious target that is a 5% reduction over 1 year. What do we need to do this? And then brainstorm it. You come up with all sorts of ideas, and then you look to see, where can I apply these ideas in the business? That's the point at which you start to audit things. And then by that time, hopefully people are already thinking along the sort of same lines as you, and you've got some sort of buy-in from people.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, do you have any are there any final comments that you would like to leave us with today as a closing note?
I don't know. I think it's great that you're doing this series. We've been writing our verdigris blogs since 2008, and we published the ISO carbon footprinting standard in 2013, I think it was. So that's 10 years ago, and it's fantastic that just this year there's been so much interest in sustainability. And I would say that whatever you do, whether it's energy management, whether it's environmental impact reduction, whatever the project is, follow the model. Plan, do, check, act, and just keep that in place all the time, because it's a good way to stop yourself going off on a tangent by mistake, because something happens to knock you off track.
Cool. Okay, that's great. And yeah, I think as we build on this series, we've got lots of different voices in the room, from carbon footprinting through to energy reduction, innovative materials, circular economy. So there's so much ground to cover, but hopefully we will stimulate some thoughts that will lead people to go off and act and plan some change, because that's the whole reason doing it.
And the change starts with all of us.
Yeah, no one's too small to make a difference, although that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, look, I think, you know, we as we move forward, our visitors to FESPA Global Print Expo in Munich on the 23rd to 26th of May can come and see some more on the Sustainability Spotlight stand, which is going to feature innovative materials and more sustainability advice. But keep an eye on this area of our site, because it's going to continue to fill up with videos, podcasts, and blogs all around this topic. So hopefully, Laurel, we'll be hearing from you again on another topic, and overall we can get to a point of reducing, reusing, recycling, and improving the way we do things.